I'm going to hand over to our fabulous session leaders today who are working as part of our team on supporting our technical assistance to applicants. And today's session is all about aligning our applications to the review criteria that the Upstate California Creative Corps has offered. Liz and Tamara, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Tamara, and I'm part of the facilitation team here today to share the information around framing your application, around reviewing the criteria. So thank you for your time and attention. We have a lot to cover, and we're excited to be here. We are hailing from Mechoopda Maidu territory, Butte County right now.
Thank you, Tamara. And my name's Liz, and I am with my presenting partner, Tamara, here, as she said, hoping to shed a little bit of light on the way we as grant writers go about aligning our finished grants to review criteria, which is so important for getting the result we want, which is being funded.
So just working on getting it into slideshow. There you go. All right, so here we are, Upstate California Creative Corps with the review criteria. It's our focus. And we just want to give a little shout out and thank you to the Upstate Community Enhancement Foundation. That's where we came from. We're in Butte County, they're a Butte County organization. Ray is our director, and yeah, he saw a vision to help support all of you, all of us, and Eliza continued that vision. So just a thank you to their support. So an agenda of what we're going to be reviewing today, we have the overview of the review process, which Eliza and Dawn are going to be just giving us a little bit of understanding of what that process is going to look like for people. We're going to be revisiting the word counts because it is an important part to your grant application. We're going to be checking out the review criteria, looking at each of the 4 areas and tips on aligning those to your application for those review criteria. Again, this is just meant to be supportive as you are hopefully already in the process of writing and how to use that as a guiding piece, because it is going to be the primary tool that the reviewers are going to be looking at. And then understanding the 6-point rubric. So just getting a brief look at that to understand what is an exemplary to what is an ineligible response. So just giving you a frame of reference as you're writing. And then if we have time, we want to be able to cover a couple other pieces that we covered at the end of our last workshop, which was around remembering what's not fundable, so that when you're writing that they're not being included in your budget or in your project description, as well as really highlighting the sustainability piece, because as we talk about the review criteria, you'll notice there's not a specific area where that shows up, but it actually shows up in all of the areas. So we just want you to have that in the front of your mind, because it's going to be something that the reviewers are looking for. So
and if we don't happen to get to that, because there is a lot to cover in the meantime, and we do want to save time for questions, the slides are available on this PowerPoint, which will be posted, I believe, on the California Creative Corps website. So you'll have that for reference.
Yes, absolutely. And feel free to use the chat to ask questions. I will do my best, as well as I'm sure Gianna as well will be tag teaming to get questions woven into what's being shared about. So if you don't hear your question asked specifically, know that we are keeping track of those and doing our best to weave them into the conversation. And then I think we'll probably pass it off at the end for Eliza to talk about next steps and any follow-up sessions or office hours, so that people can be reminded of those resources. Good.
Good.
Cool. So we're going to pass it over to you, Miss Eliza and Dawn, to talk about the review process.
Wonderful. I think from our perspective as the administering organization for these state funds from California Arts Council, I think what I'd like to suggest is just to apply a good dose of scale and relativity as we go through today. A lot of what you're hearing may seem very formal, if you're, I'm sure many of you are experienced grant writers, but for those who are not, who may not be, the whole process of applying for a grant for essentially state funds can feel very daunting. Today, we'll be sharing some tips on how to align your application with review criteria. Having said that, you're going to be hearing different methods for doing that. And we know that we all work in very different ways. I know that when I work, I do it in a very specific way, and I don't go into huge amounts of detail in terms of crosswalking review criteria with my application narrative until the end. But we want to provide this very rigorous process that our fabulous, very experienced grant writers, Liz and Tamara, are using today, so that you have options, but just don't be put off by it. Just use it and see what works for you. Don, did you have anything else to add to that?
Just to give them a little idea of what happens to their application after it leaves their hands and they hit the submit button, it will then go to a centralized place where we're eventually going to parcel them out to your counties. And your county has a panel. Each county has a panel of 5 people who apply and been selected. And then there'll be one of us there, an administrative organization person, and there'll be the county lead of the arts. So 7 people will be there. The 2 are going to be monitoring the 5, and then there's going to be leads on various applications, and that's how they're going to score it. Eventually, they'll filter back up to the central office, so to speak, and we will make the final determinations then. I just want people to be clear on the process.
Oh, you're muted.
So in other words, there is both a central sort of ombudsman, if you like, which is Upstate California Creative Corps, but from wherever you're calling in this morning, whichever county, you will have a local review panel. And this review panel will have been created using a very inclusive, public, transparent process run by your county arts council in most cases, to which all community members have been offered the option to apply and then selected. So first of all, a local review, and then it will come to us because we're the holders of the purse strings, so to speak. And we want to make sure there's a sort of element of geographic equity in funding. Hope that makes sense. Thanks, Liz and Tamara.
Fantastic. Thank you very much so. And thank you, Don, for walking through that process just step by step. I think that's helpful. It's helpful for people to know what the process is and how it works. So thank you both. So before we jump into talking about the review criteria, we just want to put this slide up here so people are made aware of what their word count is, how much space they have to explain some of these really key areas that are going to be in their application, because as we go through the review criteria, there's significant amount of areas that need to be covered as far as information and data and how it connects to the prompts and the review criteria. And so the natural place to go is like, you're going to have a lot of content. So definitely complete those answers to the best of your ability in that exemplary form. But one of the fine-tooth things you'll want to be doing at the end is going back and editing through your proposal so that you are meeting these word counts first and foremost, and then also that you're finding maybe other places, which maybe Liz will talk a little bit about that you can include some of your answers so that they're not counted in the word count. I know that might sound a little confusing in this moment, but we'll clarify here in a second. And yeah, is there anything else you want to say about the application word count?
Just as you look at it, think about usually 250 words is what fits on a double space typed back when they were typewriters or word processed page. So essentially,
Yes,
everything.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a little error in here in that, as Lisa so beautifully points out, the project description area of community residencies, which is grant category 1, actually allows for 1,250.
That's different from what I had, but
Okay.
yeah. So thank you for catching that.
Yes.
Appreciate it. So basically for your project description, you have 5 or 6 double space page equivalent amount of space. So
Right. And there's all these key areas that need to be included in that amount. And so I think that's really what we're trying to draw your attention to, is that there's a finite amount of space and you need to cover these key areas throughout the document. So if you can, I would screenshot this page just to have it as a reference for yourself
Except with the correction to
Yes.
community residency.
and make the correction to
Yeah.
1250 there. Okay, you ready?
So as Eliza alluded to, there are different ways to write grants. I'm a very sort of linear A, B, C, D, E, aligned with the rubric. As she mentioned, she's a little more holistic. Tamara might be a little bit, what'd you say?
I said a little more alternative or creative in reaching out to collaborative supports to figure out what I need. The term that came to mind was avant-garde.
Which I love.
Yes.
But no matter how we go about the process of writing the grant, and no matter, and that our finished applications are going to look different, read different, be presented differently to some degree, but ultimately all are going to be reviewed in the same way. And so our goal today is to help you create something that will pass the review with the highest number of points possible by aligning it to the review criteria.
Mhm. And creating ease for the reviewer to see your story that you're telling in your proposal with ease as well, so they can
Correct.
give you those points.
So first of all, this is something I think we covered previously in a grant writing workshop, but it's so important before you start a grant to read and reread all the materials that are associated with it. And that includes the review criteria or the rubric itself, the grantee requirements, all prompts, every word in the project description, and all the definitions. It's just, you need to know those. But at the end, after you've written, it's important to go back through and read them again, because that lets you see if you left something out or if there's a key, something that's being looked for that you didn't have in there. It might be able to beef up, if that makes sense.
And you're able to go to the website now, as Gianna is mentioning, and open the application and start putting in your responses there. There's also a printable application. All these resources are available on the website. So what Liz is sharing is accessible to you now and could be, you know, your lunchtime reading to just go through these things and be have them fresh in your mind.
So basically your job is to answer all the narrative prompts thoroughly. So if you look at the grant guidelines for whatever category you're applying to, 1, 2, or 3, there's 2 pages. Oh,
We have a question if you have to do the application all in one sitting. No, you do not. You can open it and there's certain parts you can't go beyond once you've completed certain questions. So you do have to put content in there, which you can go back and edit. That's why I suggest printing out the application or opening it in a window on your computer, because then you can go through the entire thing and start collecting the information that you already have for each of the answers.
right. So in the actual application itself, there's 3 main areas that you write narrative. One is project description, one is accessibility, and one is key people. And then you also have some shorter responses that are also important. Project summary, and for categories 2 and 3, you talk about your organization's mission and background programming. But those prompts that are in the narrative are presented, like I said, in those 3 categories. So there's project description, there's key people, and there's work samples. But then they're assessed against a review criteria that's divided into 4 categories, which we're going to spend the next bit of time going through. So it's your job to be sure that all the review criteria are addressed within the narrative prompts. And we're going to give you a tool that we hope will help you with that. Basically, the reviewers, when I've been a reviewer before on other, not for this, but for other applications, generally reviewers are instructed to look for information wherever it is in the grant. So if you're talking about your organizational capacity, for example, or your history of carrying out similar programs, that might show up in your narrative, but it might also come through in letters of support that get received. So the reviewer will be looking for it in those places, but it's your job to be sure that it's really easy for them to find everything that they need. So with that being said, there are certain places that it's most logical that reviewers are going to look. And what we've got here now, we've divided the review criteria. Okay, I'm back up here. We're assuming that you all are familiar with the review criteria that are part of this grant. And I don't know how to change to show that on this. It's just can we,
We can stop sharing and
is
share
it
it
possible to
different.
do a show of hands or something to see if we need to remind you where to find this on the site?
If you
It looks
like,
like-
wonderful. So Gianna just shared it in the chat as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So this is sort of the Bible by which your grant is going to be reviewed, and it's in 4 key areas, which is health equity, project design, community engagement, and why do we have that twice?
Creative process.
Creative process.
Yes,
We
it's
put-
it's creative process right there. It's
Okay, yeah. Anyway, yes, those 4. Thank you, Don. So for each of these, there are between 4 and 6 different separate areas, criteria that need to be addressed. What we've got here is a list of those exactly as they appear within the grant guidelines. And you can also find them, I believe, on the website of Upstate Creative Corps. But then we created a second column that shows the most likely location in your application where the reviewers are probably going to be looking for these specific things. So as you look over your finished grant and you're reading your responses to project description B and C, for example, so give you an example of that. If we were in grant category 1, project description B is describe who your project will serve and how many, including any intergenerational learning aims. And C is describe how your project will impact communities in the lowest quartile of the California Healthy Places Index, or explain other metrics you are using to measure the health of communities that you serve. So those are 2 questions that you'll be answering within the narrative in project description B and C. The review criteria you can see is almost identical to C, that describe how your project will impact those communities. So as you go through, as you reread your grant, look at exactly what the review criteria says and ask yourself, is this question completely answered by the review criteria? So then, does that make sense? Are there any questions so far? Is this working? Okay. So, dumb question.
Is the word character count the maximum, the minimum, or do we need to hit the
That's a
numbers out?
great question.
It's the maximum.
I believe that's right. Eliza, the word count, the
Yes,
1,000, for example, that's the maximum number of words, correct?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the maximum. You do not need to write the maximum, but it's there for you to use should you need it.
Mhm. So you're going to probably need to do a lot of editing, I believe. Some people will.
Right. So Valerie, you're saying that the sharing of the review criteria and where you might most likely find it in the application, that's not a clear connection for you. If you'd be willing to maybe.
Let me help you here. I'm going to share the screen. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let's make this great. So I'm going to just do this. Okay, here we go on our homepage. What you're going to do to find the review criteria, you can go to 2 places. You can find it in resources. However, if you want a really accurate summary of what review criteria you're going to be working to for your particular grant category, remember there are 3 grant categories, is to hover over apply now And you see where it says applications for download. Here are the 3 categories of grants that we're offering. Category 1, 2, 3. If I were to open up, say, community residencies, here's the application itself. At the beginning of each application, we give a little bit more information about the nature of this specific grant category. But if you go all the way down to the end, you'll find the review criteria. There you go, review criteria for grant category 2. Make sense?
And the resources all 3 are listed.
Wonderful. And Gianna is correcting me. Gianna was concerned that I thought that only 1 review criteria was listed in upstate in our under our resources page. But in fact, if I click on this, she's fantastically arranged it so that all 3 categories are there. Make sense? So possibly the fastest way for you to find it is just to go to the resources tab, right, Gianna?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that's helpful. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So it sounds like that was helpful. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, it's helpful to have the questions come as they arise. To the
Mhm.
extent that we can answer them, we will. I want to I don't know that it's necessarily going to be helpful for us to read through every single review criteria, but
Right.
there's a couple things I would like to point out. So on 1B is an example of a review criteria that's multi-part. And so the temptation, especially when you're just starting out with writing grants, is to answer one part of the question or the criteria. This one, though, would need a little bit more information. So, for example, let me just go through it. Does the project show intention and capacity to create awareness for issues relating to the lives of individuals and communities, contributing to their health, well-being, or overall resilience? So, does the project show intention and capacity? What the heck? What does that mean? What's the difference? How would I go about addressing something like that? If I were writing this grant, intention would probably come through in whatever, certainly the goal that I chose, and then outcomes, specific steps to meet those goals. So if I say that I want to address the fact that that Latinos are underrepresented in any kind of art that has been displayed at the museum. I'm making this up now. Then I would have steps that would be set to increase that. Capacity would be, me or the organization I'm working with, do we have the background that would let us carry that out? So that would come through in possibly letters of support, possibly a description of what our previous experience has been in this kind of programming, and possibly in just the narrative itself, where we could talk about that. So, but there's 2 different pieces to address, and in several of the review criteria, this is true. And so that's why we've kind of identified key people, the 4 different areas for 1B. Letters of support. If you're reading through your answer to that and you see that the intention is really clear because you've written great outcomes around it, but the capacity may not be so clear, then when you ask for a letter of support, you might want to make a targeted letter of support. You might want to say, hey, could you please write me a letter of support for this grant, and could you specifically address the extent to which, as an organization, we've been successful in creating this kind of programming with underrepresented communities? Does that make sense? So you're building your case with a lot of different pieces to it. And then also on this page with the health equity, 1C and 1D. And Eliza, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Don, certainly, but when I first read 1C and 1D, it sounded like these 2 are pretty overlapping and similar. But as I read closer, 1C is the public component of the project properly described with attention paid to ensuring accessibility and an equitable experience for those with disabilities. So if I were answering 1C, I would talk about the extent to which accessibility is a problem or what the barriers to accessibility might be that currently exist. And then 1D are plans to improve the experience of participants with disabilities or other barriers to participation clear. That's where I'd say there's no way to access this building if you don't have a wheelchair. And so then my plan might be, so we will build a ramp, which I don't think would be allowable actually under this grant, but
Yes, I think I know what you're saying because it's important, and maybe Gianna, you can share the what we do not fund doc. But again, all these resources are on our resources page on the website. So maybe if you just share the resources, we'll keep sharing it, the resources link. It does say indeed that California Creative Corps cannot fund large capital projects, pieces of expensive equipment that will linger on and be tremendously useful for you, ironically, beyond the grant activity period. California Arts Council allow you to rent, but not build. But I think I'm sure that there are exceptions for small, very important things, but in general, that's the principle. Have a look on the link that has just been shared. Sorry
Yeah.
to be so long-winded, Liz and Tamara.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And there is a slide towards the end of this presentation as well that shares that information as well. So
Perfect.
you'll have it in both places. And I believe, Gianna, there was a question from Tom that you wanted to answer. If now's a good time. Okay.
Jenna?
Is this
From Dawn.
the
Tom.
oh,
from
I'm
Tom.
so sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry. Tom, you asked about, and I asked Liz and Tamara if I could interrupt just to answer this, because I'm sure it's something that everyone will be thinking. So imagine that we have 19 counties and there are 19 review panels, and goodness knows how many grant applications coming in for each county. We have to wait for all those panels, which basically have 7 people on each panel, 1 representative of the administering organization, 1 representative from the county partner, and then 5 community panelists in each county. So they all have time, they need time from the moment that the deadline has passed for us to gather those proposals together, those applications together. Then we need to send them out to the counties send them out to the panelists need time to absorb and digest what they're reading in order to bring even preliminary recommendations back to the table, the metaphorical table where they all meet to discuss. When they meet to discuss, they're going to challenge each other, which is great, it's very healthy. And the process will ensure that every single application gets the best, most neutral and supportive response back to the applicants. So it takes time, this, and we have 3 different grant categories that we're reviewing in 19 different counties. So we need a good old length of time for us to, give really intelligent and heartfelt responses back to applicants. Make sense?
To
Oh, yes.
clarify,
It really does. I understand that now. What I'm asking as a follow-up is, the awards are made June 7th. Why does the program not start till June 26th?
Oh, I see. That's because then we're working on grant paperwork with however many applicants we have. And so it takes time, for us to get the checks out of the door, for us to get the grant paperwork signed off on and everything like that. So
And then once my organization gets the grant, can they pay me immediately as an advance to do the work? Because I've done a lot of work already.
well, Tom, you better make sure that you're having a good conversation with that organization that you're applying.
It's the letter of agreement. It's in the letter.
Absolutely.
Right. I had a chance once where it was Placer County said, okay, we're gonna do it. You work for 30 days, bill us and we'll pay you in 30 days. So I had to work 60 days for free and I couldn't do that. So I said no. And they found a way to pay me. So I want to make sure.
Yes, for all of you, just make sure that for all of those of you who are artists or culture bearers working under grant categories 2 or 3, make sure that you have an understanding before you go into this. And that can go into the letter of agreement even.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's let Liz and Tamara get on with it.
Yes, absolutely. There was a question about whether or not having a portfolio would be in replacement, I would assume, of some of these letters of report or key people. Maybe Liz, you can speak to that, where they could be included beyond in the application.
Portfolio, I don't know that.
I know that in the application, there's specific places for you to upload work samples. And so that would be places that pieces of your portfolio would be applicable depending on what your project is. Maybe Eliza has something to share about that. And then one other thing I want to add, somebody asked about this chart and whether you were going to be, this was going to be available to you. There was a version that was available in our original workshop we did about a month ago. So I'm sure if you email Gianna, they can get you those resources. Also, this presentation is going to be accessible to you once this is complete. This is this chart is in the presentation, and I believe that one will be emailed out, and I might be corrected by Eliza. But
yes, I'm trying to understand Valerie's question. I'm not sure that I understand it. Valerie, do you mean that perhaps you don't have a website to show the collective work of the artists in whatever category you're applying to, but you have a portfolio? Could you explain what you mean by that?
You were speaking that what experience did we have in terms of being able to accomplish this?
Oh,
And that's in a portfolio and in a resume.
okay.
I mean, if we're focused on sustainability and we've created sustainability for other areas, not necessarily focused it's specifically artists, but artists were included, then how is that utilized?
Are you applying for grant category 1, 2,
C,
3?
3, yes.
Yes, of course. Okay. Yeah. I think what you have to do is really familiarize. Have you gone into the application itself?
Absolutely.
You
Yes,
have.
yes. Mhm.
So there are different places, and I think this is one of Liz and Tamara's key points, is that as well as using this formidable and beautifully linear process of this crosswalk, there are different parts, and Liz and Tamara will be speaking to this themselves as well. There are different parts of the application where you can share evidence of your capacity to complete a project, for example.
That's what I mean. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are different places where you can, both in narrative form, but then in uploads, you can upload your single page PDF, which has resumes in it and portfolios and things like that. What you want to do, Valerie, is make sure that it's as simple as possible. Put yourself in the shoes always of a panelist. Imagine a panelist opening that document, and what are they going to see? How are they going to be directed to view that document? Is it going to be made very simple? If you've included multiple documents in one upload, you might want to have a cover sheet that says, this is to the panelists, this is what you can expect to see, page 1, 2, 3, and this is where we show this and that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Literally just sort of be a voyeur and just put yourself in the shoes of a panelist and what would they like to see. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
yes, Gianna, would you be willing to put your email in the chat, because some people are not sure how to reach out to you to get some of the information and for the chart that's being shared. And what I like to do during presentations is I screenshot. So if you're on a computer and you know how to do that, you could be doing that while we go through these slides, because we're going to go through 3 more slides here pretty quickly so we can get back to questions.
And I will actually answer that one thing, Liz.
Okay.
Sorry, Tamara, I'm so sorry to interrupt Jean's question about whether this crosswalk. So what this crosswalk is that you're looking at is a combination of the review criteria as it's offered in each application and as it's offered on our resources page. We very intentionally chose not to include it as a resource because there are grant writers who will just find it terrifyingly sort of left-brained and inaccessible. And if, like me, you're a grant writer who just holds steady in my mind's eye the 4 review criteria as you're writing, and then therefore it's a very sort of a much more sort of organic process for you as yourself as a grant writer, you might find it very off-putting. So we didn't want to put it up here, but as Tamara says, I think it's a great idea. You know, by all means, take screenshots, and you can write to us and we can send it to you if you think it'll be helpful.
Perfect.
But this will this whole slideshow will be shared though, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So it will be available through that as well. And I just want to say one more thing about this. This is a linear, and I can see how it would be a potentially off-putting chart for some people. And it is really just, it's not the be all and end all. So I guess maybe I don't know if that's why Eliza does or does not want to use it as a resource, but I suspect so, because there's no guarantee that by including information in what's in the left-hand column, most likely location, that you're absolutely going to be answering the criteria. Then that probably makes things even worse to say it that way.
But essentially, it's intended to be a tool to support you in answering the questions. And for me personally, as being an avant-garde writer, it's very helpful to have tools to go back and look through and edit, because once you've created your proposal, once you've written it, you want to go back and revisit that as much as possible, and kind of, as Eliza is saying, get your mind in the frame of the reviewer and what they're looking for. And so this is a good tool to do that. But yeah, it's meant to be supportive, and if it is, take some screenshots and have the presentation coming to you shortly.
I think we should sort of continue with your. I
Yes,
think
we're
we save
continuing.
questions
And
for
actually,
the end at this
that's
stage.
what we're gonna do.
Great.
Yes. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go.
So the next review criteria is project design.
Project design, and this is a kind of a beefy one. This is where the bulk of your, the meat of your proposal is going to lie. And I'm not going to go through each one of the criteria on this or the location. Just going to leave it up on the screen a bit for people to look at, digest, and get a sense of all the different things that are included in this section. Now, the one thing I will say about this section, well, actually, it's not on here. This is project design. There's a section that you're going to be responding to called project description. And that's where you include a variety of different information, your plan, your outcomes, but also a timeline. That's the 1,000 word section or the 1,250 word section. And I believe there may be an option. One of the things you're asked to include is a detailed timeline. If you want to create a timeline as a Word table or an Excel document, I think you can upload it as a supporting material. Is that something, Eliza, that's correct?
Yes, we did think that this might be an option for you to do. So, for example, for some of the larger, I know that when I've applied for California Arts Council grants, when there has been the flexibility in terms of work sample uploads offered, then I have occasionally used that to have a separate document that contains my timeline. There is absolutely no need to do that. And so, you know, don't feel that you have to do that, but especially for grant categories 1 and 2, are essentially the more you're asking for. It makes sense that the more detail the panelists will want to know about your proposed project, you know, and sometimes a timeline is a fabulous way of showing a panel that you mean business and that you've really thought this through. So if it helps to use one of those upload buttons to create a separate document and thereby give yourself some extra word count in the program narrative, then by all means do that. Hope that is helpful.
So Lisa just asked, how does the timeline fit into the 1,250 word count then, please? Could one just add that rather than include it in the project description? Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. So you buy yourself some words that way, if you choose to do that.
And let people know that it's referenced in the timeline.
Yes, absolutely. I would write in the narrative, say, see attached timeline or see attached detailed timeline uploaded in.
And this
support.
relates back to some of the questions around if you only have a finite amount of space that Jada asked around emphasizing the key people that when you're working with an organization or a cultural bearer, who do you emphasize? And I think the idea is that you kind of you make a concise statement about both in the narrative part, and then you utilize the other areas that ask for information, which is you need artist bios, you need information about the organization and your letter of agreements. So in those other places that are not counted on word count, you can really elaborate.
Correct. Okay, and so again, just to let you know that what's here, that's review criteria. 2 was project design. 3 is community engagement. And same caveat here, I'm not going to read it. It's here. Take a look while it's up on the screen. Screenshot it, take a picture with your phone, because that's how I work technologically. Just be sure that all of these pieces are addressed, and on the right is where.
There was a question that Sahara asked about letters of recommendation and who could write that. And this kind of, I feel, references to community engagement. Letters of recommendation are going to come from whoever you feel are the best sources to explain your capacity to do the work or the organization's capacity to do the work. Any other additional letters, I don't know if there's a max amount of letters that you can submit, but you really want those key letters to be coming from people who can cover both of those areas, talking about the artist capacity and the organization's capacity.
And then finally, this should say creative process rather than community engagement.
Yes.
And
sorry.
so that's okay. Just say it in one spot. And so this is the last criteria. It's very important to address the creative process. So is the project demonstrating originality? Actually, it says, where it says most likely location and application, it says project description, but it should probably also say work samples, because it's quite likely that you could, with the work samples that you upload, demonstrate some sort of originality with that.
There was a couple of questions from Eve and Tom about how those information could be uploaded. So I'm going to ask maybe Gianna or Eliza to answer that. So can people use hyperlinks? So if it's another website in the application, that's one of the questions. And then another one is, does it have a time limit? Does it have to be within the last 2 years with those samples?
We do prefer, I'm trying to remember what we say in the grant guidelines. You might like to refer to the grant guidelines for that. In general, it makes sense, doesn't it, to include samples and evidence of work and capacity if it's recent work. And I'm not saying that it has to be within 2 years. I can't remember what we put in the guidelines offhand. We have three different grant categories. But in general, I would try to make it as recent as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And then the hyperlink, did you?
I actually, sorry, I really like what Erica says, that in the last 2 years, I just saw that comment come up, Erica, that by insisting on it being in the last 2 years in a linear fashion, that it's not sensitive to COVID. Of course, all our work was interrupted by COVID, right? I'm looking at Jean, who's with us today, who runs this extraordinary organization in the High Sierra called Trails and Vistas, and their programming was completely disturbed, you know, obviously. So of course we're going to be sensitive to that. So forget the 2 years bit and just do the best you can. Give us, you know, examples of recent work that makes sense.
And then the hyperlink.
The hyperlink question, in general, I'd probably encourage you, and we need to find out whether hyperlinks appear, whether they're live, they're not. When you when you copy and paste a link, a URL into the narrative of the online application, it's not going to carry forward. And so you might want to instead have a single document that includes links to sources of evidence of your work, whether it's, you know, YouTube or Vimeo or a podcast or a website or a, you know, whatever it is. And then be thoughtful towards the panelists, let them know what it is rather than dump a load of, you know, links into a document. Tell the panelist that's looking at the document, what is this? Which artist is it? And what does it show? Etc. etc. Hope that's helpful.
Yes. I think that there were a couple other questions I wanted to weave in here about letters of support from the lead artists or from larger groups, and also just around letters of recommendation for capacity. So for artists, there is a request in the application for letters of support for the artists. So that's one category of it. And then the letters of recommendation for groups or capacity, that was what Liz was speaking to before. If you have other projects or have worked in other ways in the community that shows that you have capacity, that's where that letter is going to be explaining that. So somebody asked, well, what if you haven't done this project before? Well, you're building that capacity based on things you have done before or things that the organization has done before. And so that's what the letter would be including. There's not an expectation that you're going to be able to say this has happened before because it's a new project, but how can you explain the capacity to do the new project? Hopefully that's
Right, if you've done
helpful.
a project in the past, so you've been able to follow through, you've been able to meet outcomes or adjust as needed, because sometimes you set outcomes in for whatever reason, they just don't seem to work out. And so you might just make a little change mid-course and then explain at the end, we weren't able to address this outcome because of COVID or because of, you know, whatever happened. So I've just thrown this up on the screen. It's a 6-point rubric, which reviewers are going to use. Your final application will receive a score between 1 and 6. And that it's from exemplary to ineligible. These are the descriptors for each of those levels. So as you can see, if there's a few of the review criteria that you are not able to address for whatever reason, that doesn't necessarily knock your grant out of the running. Do the best job with what you can. It's a relatively limited number of words that you have to work with and kind of a big project. And I'm thinking we've got a couple other slides that we're not going to show because there are so many questions. I think we want to just use the small amount of time we have left to make sure we have all of those answered. There was one, somebody asked if Tamara and I are available for questions by email. I can answer for me. I can say yes, and when I can get to it, I'll get to it. Typically, I can get to questions, and I'll put my email in the chat. But I need to make a big caveat with that, that any answer that I give is from the position, my position, which is somebody who's written grants before. And so if anybody comes to me for advice on any grant, I would say, well, here's how I'd approach this. Does that guarantee it's correct? No. Does that guarantee, correct in the terms of, is that necessarily going to get you the funding? No. Do I have an inside track on exactly what Eliza and her wonderful team have developed? No, I don't. So I can happy to give advice, but it's just one person, one individual's advice. But I will put my email in there for that. And what other questions do we have, Tamara?
I can run through them if you like. The number of links. It depends what grant category. If it's a solo artist application, it perhaps wouldn't need to be so many. If it's for a very large amount of funding, you're going to want to share enough that you feel you have communicated the rigor of contribution of each of the partners, for example. So it might be a few more. It's very hard because we have three different grant categories to be able to say, you know, which number. I think, Lisa, it was you that asked that question about how many links, and I think you're going for a community residency. I don't know the number of artists included in that residency, but you know, I'd hazard a guess at say 5 links. I mean, what you don't want to do is to, you know, confuse the panel with too many links. You want to make your, whatever it is you're offering needs to be extremely short. You know, they're only going to be able to watch. Imagine these are volunteers who are community members who are receiving a small stipend for their work, but they don't have that much time to review. So you're going to make it really easy for them.
There's a question there.
I can't see those questions, so Jordan, because we're really trying to whiz through this, why don't you write your question down and then we'll come back to it, because I'm very aware of us, we're only sort of a part of the way through our presentation. So
we're not necessarily presenting anymore because there are so many questions coming up that I think people want the answers to, but there was one question about sustainability. So here's a slide that we included in our budget presentation that we did a couple weeks ago related to sustainability. So there is no specific question except maybe in category 3. I can't remember. There's one that might specifically ask about it, but most of the other ones don't specifically ask you to address it. But as Tamara mentioned, the idea of sustainability is woven throughout, and you should be able to do the same in your application.
And to clarify, because it was one of the questions that came up in our last presentation, sustainability as in the life of the project, sustaining beyond the grant period, because sustainability means other things in other realms. But what we're referring to, yes, is the life of this project, this work to continue in some capacity, shape, or form. And not that it's required. Eliza mentioned that last time. It's just that it's just touching upon that concept.
And here's
our proposal.
Yes, and here's why we even reference sustainability. This is a pilot program that's been fueled by a legislative decision to hand the state a single one-time sum of money that is 3 times the amount of California Arts Council's general operating budget for any given year. So what we're hoping to do is make this pilot funding permanent. And the way that we'll be able to do that is if we receive applications that look as if they might become fabulous case studies that could be adopted by other communities that we could show into the future. You know, that's such a beautiful project that it can be something that's borrowed, become a case study, will be something we can show you off through, and something that we can woo our legislators with such that they will want to continue this funding. I hope that makes sense.
So may I please, is that sustainability for the artists or just for the community? Because the artists are the ones that are dying on the vine.
So it's sustainability for the project that you're receiving funding for. The funding you're asking for, Valerie, is going to be funding the artist, right? 80% of it will fund your artists. So that in itself is ensuring that we're supporting the artist. It's a workforce development project. We must support artists through this. Nevertheless, the project which your artists are going to be creating could become a case study for something marvelous that could happen and be borrowed by other communities. So think of it like that.
May I please? What my focus is to create sustainability for the artists. So the artists beyond the year will be able to be sustained, and not just for 1 year. but the program will support the artist to be sustainable.
Fantastic. So you have to create a winning proposal that tells us how you propose to, reach that level of sustainability. It sounds amazing.
And I believe that was addressed in our last workshop by Rita, singer-songwriter, who had an idea for a project that would result, among other things, in a product, a CD. But then she said, I anticipate that my fans, the, people that follow me, my music, would want to purchase this. And if I understood Eliza's response correctly, after the grant period is over, there's nothing that precludes that. So she can create something as a part of the grant. When the grant period ends, rights revert to her. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So then she has the ability then to sustain herself by continuing to sell and potentially even create additional similar projects and works.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were referring to, Valerie. So was that Valerie asking the question?
Yes, thank you. You're inching toward it. Yes, that was a
Okay.
nice example.
Okay. I think it sounds to me, from my outside perspective, like that's the goal of this funding, is to support artists, and doing this for 1 year is a step in the right direction. And so if whatever project you develop can jumpstart you to then go on and
I'd like to answer Jordan's question. Absolutely, this will be available afterwards. So for anyone that is, I'm teasingly calling left-brained in terms of how useful the crosswalk will be, they will have access to it afterwards. I just don't want to put it up as a standalone document, that crosswalk, in case others who are not experienced will find it off-putting. We reserve the right for a certain level of flexibility and judgment during the panel process, bearing in mind that we're trying to distribute these funds really equitably across projects from all manner of disciplines and practices and social practices that are answering, that we need to sort of attach to 4 different program goals. So it's a very complicated process for us as an administering organization, and we want to reserve the right to be flexible once we've had all recommendations in, based upon our knowledge of what the field has produced collectively. But yes, this will be available for you, Jordan, never fear. And as I mentioned earlier in this session, knowing that you wish for that crosswalk, we can send it to you by email. Totally happy to do that. Anyone who wants the document can ask for it and we'll send it to them.
So I guess I don't understand the difference between a crosswalk and a standalone document. The rest of the resources I found have been, they have hyperlinks and they're documents.
Yes.
Maybe I don't understand what that means.
Well,
Is it going to be up as such, or is it hidden in something else?
no, it's not hidden anywhere. It's going to be available for everyone to see afterwards when we upload, both as a recording so that you can watch it.
Right.
And also that this particular PowerPoint will be available to you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for it. I just didn't understand.
No problem.
And just a couple questions from Willow and I think Laura about who is an artist and who can be included. Just by looking at the application that was referenced, Eliza showed us where to find that. In the first, I think on the second page, it talks about who's an artist and who can be included there, and that will answer your questions there. But yes, I think both the musicians, there's places for musicians to be included and expressive artists. And as far as I understand, there's no barring against students applying for this funding. So, but for anybody else that's curious about those answers, in the first part of the application, it does outline that stuff.
So in terms of artists who receive funding, they need to be over 18. And we have a wonderful document called Intergenerational Learning, which for those of you who are interested in education and learning, I really encourage you to read that document. It's on our resources page and it's linked to from our FAQ and our glossary of terms and definitions. And that will answer all your questions, Tom. Try to make yourself familiar with that. We know that high school kids are an unbelievable treasure and source of creativity. There are also many education grants available both through the state and through new legislation that's coming down. This isn't an education grant. It does favor intergenerational projects. So make sure that you've understood what that actually means and the differences between community-anchored intergenerational learning versus formal arts education. I hope that makes sense and it's helpful.
Thank you.
There's a question from Aaron.
There's a question up there from Erica, Eliza.
Yes, yes. I'm just reading it now. It's sometimes challenging talking and reading at the same time, isn't it?
I can ask it or read it for you.
Yeah, no, I think I get it. Basically, you're talking about matched funding of different kinds. Absolutely. We don't require match funding. Many of the state grants do require matched funds. So this is glorious. We're not asking you to provide monies for match funding. However, you can show us, you know, you could make a budget note, for example, or you could put it in your project narrative that your local community foundation is sponsoring, or your local community bank is sponsoring another part of the project. We don't need you to say that, but it does add strength to it, of course, implicitly. It's fantastic. In
Well,
fact,
actually, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
No.
Keep
So
finishing.
to clarify, the slides that are being shown right now were slides that were included in our last presentation. We just felt that there was relevance to the conversation we had today. We don't actually have time to go over these slides, so I'm just leaving that up there while we are talking. Before, I don't know, Erica, if you're going to add something to what was being shared. There's another question about the budget being multiple pages if it's for 5 different projects. My assumption would be they would upload all the budgets in one document on the link that is provided in the application. But Eliza, maybe you could add more information there. And then also maybe you could tell people about next steps as far as where to get more of their questions answered, because there's more questions.
Could I
Yeah.
finish clarifying the question that I had?
Totally.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you all so much for your time. I know it went by so fast. Yeah, Eliza, I just wanted to, we're not actually talking about matching funds, so we will be seeking matching funds probably more in the future, but we were talking about for sponsorships, and I wasn't clear. I know we had talked about this in past Q&As, but I wasn't super clear on that. Like, for example, we're doing some shows, we're doing performing arts shows. And so we want to, and for larger events, we want to seek certain sponsors for those shows to help bring in more funding. Is that allowable, or can we talk about that part of increasing our sustainability and getting other supporters for the project?
I think it's a wonderful question. I would probably call that match funding, but whether you choose to call it match funding or not is absolutely fine. I do think it adds to the sustainability. What I would say is make sure you're not charging the public to enjoy those performances. Make sure that you're not, whatever you do, you're not adding barriers to the public participation, particularly of those communities, those vulnerable communities that you're hoping to serve. So I hope that's helpful, Erica. There's absolutely no reason you shouldn't seek additional sponsorships. That's exactly the kind of thing that lends sustainability, isn't it? If you're able.
Thank you.
Yes, Jean, I want to answer your question about, is there a way to submit multiple budget pages on one grant application? Because my organization's grant application is for 5 projects. May I use 5 different budget pages, one for each project? Ooh, gosh, that sounds like a very gorgeous and ambitious application. I'm assuming you're going for grant category 2? 2, yeah. So it's single county community residency. When we designed the budget on our portal, we asked SurveyMonkey Apply, which is the portal that we're using, to make it possible to add lines if this obvious space provided were not enough. I don't have the portal open right now. We'll check on it later, but you should be able to, at the moment it shows 12, but I will need to confirm with SurveyMonkey as to how the applicant can add additional lines. I wonder whether there's a way for you to compress some of the information you share so that the panelists are not sort of blown away. Like, I don't want to use the word lump things together because that's also not useful for a panelist, but maybe use the budget notes area to clarify anything that you've compressed together, for example, like how you're thinking about artist salaries, for example. Yes.
Or I might
Yeah.
suggest an overarching budget that includes each one of those projects. So that's like the first document that somebody sees, and then they could see multiple breakouts of how that funding would be used, because obviously the amount would want to be adding up to whatever you're asking for, and that would be the first thing that most readers would want to see. Otherwise, it might be a little confusing.
I agree. I love that idea, Tamara, and we've done that before too. An example is we applied for ARP, American Rescue Plan monies from the county of Nevada, a couple of years ago, and I had 3 different budgets for 3 different projects, and they were on different tabs. They wanted to see it in Excel, so of course it made it much easier. But my top sheet showed all 3, and if there's a way to do that. We're not offering the opportunity to upload an Excel sheet because it will get too confusing with the number of applications that we have. So we want to see one template, but I will make sure that it's possible to add line items to that. Otherwise, it'll just be too general. I understand.
Would it also be possible to, for example, under the artist, do artist 1, artist 2, artist 3, artist 4, and then the amount and the role and everything, and then in terms of supplies for artist 1, for artist 2, for artist 3, and then describe it?
Yes, I don't see why not. And again, the budget notes is an excellent way to do that. And just a note on, most of you will know this, many of you will know this, little tricks when you're grant writing and using open fields like the one that we've offered for budget notes, which is beneath the budget template on the online portal. Separate out your notes, give space between each note rather than do one long massive paragraph. Does that make sense? So that it's visually easy for a panelist to grasp. Little things like that help, don't they?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that the easier you can make it for the reviewer, the better chance you have of having a successful review.
Are there word counts for that though? Because I know that each like space is a word count usually.
No, not in the budget notes. And this wraps me back to Sahara's question around, if you're in the upstate area and you are applying for this funding, can you use a fiscal sponsorship, a scholarship from an LA County? My assumption is no, because the recipient needs to be in the upstate, but I could be incorrect. So Eliza, would you elaborate?
You're absolutely right. If you are the lead applicant, you must use a local fiscal sponsor. If you're the, if it's the, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it needs to be local. Sahara, if you need help thinking about this, we're so happy to talk to you.
Yes, and so that's, in these 19 counties above in what's considered the upstate. And it's a great question, because when reviewers are going through a number of applications, they're looking for these basic requirements to be met. And if it's not in the count, if the request is coming from outside of the 19 counties, then that's going to be like, doesn't meet the requirements. So I think that was a great question, Sahara, to just bring awareness that those basic application questions, so they seem like simple and easy, they are important to make sure they fit within the requirements of what this funding is for.
Okay, but can I still get a letter of recommendation from them?
Oh, yes, I think that would be good. A letter of recommendation that shows your capacity or skill to do the work. Yes,
Background, yeah.
yes. As far as being the recipient of the funding, that's kind of what we're talking about.
And that could speak to sustainability down the road too.
Mhm.
Not that it can be used for this grant, but
But since I do have a LLC, I need to either have a nonprofit or the fiscal sponsorship to be able to do the category 2, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's something that I need to talk to you guys about and figure out how I'm gonna do this part.
Absolutely. Sounds like Eliza said that they're available for that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
and I see a
Thank you.
question from Bobby. Can lead organization applying for category 3 also be hired as an artist? Hi, Bobby.
Sorry, which question was this?
This is from Bobby Ray Jones.
Okay, can a lead organization applying for category 3? Yes, that's,
So can they be,
so do you mean, Bobby, do you mean in another category? So as well as being the lead organization for a category 3 grant, you might also be hired as an artist in a category 2 or 1 grant, 1 or 2 grant?
No, for the same, for category 3. So if I'm managing and administrating sort of all the pieces of our project,
Yes.
as that person, can I also be hired as an artist?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely you can, Bobby. Tell me about your organization. Is it a 501c3 or a unit of
No.
government?
No, we have a fiscal sponsor. that
I
will be
see.
supporting that.
Okay, great, good. I'm glad I clarified that. We want our artists to be paid.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question regarding that as well, kind of more specifics on that. Is that okay if I ask them?
Yes, of course it is.
You have
Yes.
like a template for who's asking questions next. If we have some artists who are going to be both artists and culture bearers, and then they might also be in the admin costs. Like, for example, they're going to develop our website. Can we do that? Can we pay for both them as an artist and then maybe them as through their company to do like the website or media services? Or does it all need to go under their artist cost in the budget?
I mean, I would say that a graphic artist qualifies as an artist. So, Erica, it sounds like, how many other artists, let me ask you this, how many other artists will be in your project for a category 3?
But we're still doing 2 unless we find further other
Yes.
accounting support.
So I will say right away that if you're applying for a category 3, we're going to really want to understand the capacity of your organization to support the artists and the work. So I don't know how many, but it might be, on the other hand, that the strength of your application is because you're small and nimble. So we will take that into account as well. But we'll be looking at, especially for category 3, which implies a larger amount of funding, we're going to be looking for a level of accountability, a level of utilizing partnerships. Some artists in category 3 grants are aligning themselves with organizations who can lend capacity to them as artists. But if in your case, you're both the artist and the organization, you're going to want to be extra sure that you show us how you are being supported and how you're able to do this heavy lift of a multi-county or regional approach. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. I think actually to clarify that, I understood that we had to have, like, we weren't going to go through for category 3 unless we found like a government agency we had to go through. But if we're partnering with other nonprofits or other organizations that are in the other counties, is that okay enough, or does it have to be a government organization?
No,
or agency?
absolutely not. No, actually, I'm looking teasingly at my colleague Don here, because it was Don that wrote that authored that particular piece, that we would hope to see some partnership with local, municipal or county agencies in grant category 3, because it's a lot more money. We hope that the support of local government will lend capacity and lend a sustainability potential, if you like, for the project. It's not 100% required, but we have put it in there as a recommendation. So I don't know which counties you're thinking of going to, but perhaps connect in and see what local support you can get from municipalities, et cetera, et cetera.
And if I may add to that, I think Eliza explained it very well. I would try to find somebody who would at least say they're in support of it and have that be a letter of recommendation, even if they're not a structural partner, and address how strong you're going to be anyway. How you replace the fact that you don't have a government agency, keep your project aligned with everything.
So I just want to add that Jean has a question that she would like to ask. I want to note that it's about 1:25 timeframe, and so I want to honor that other people probably have other places to be. And I want to see if Gianna be willing to post in the chat when the last, I think, question Q&A session is for this grant cycle. I think there's only one more. If I may be incorrect, but if you could post that in the chat for everyone, so they can continue to ask questions. But I do want to let Jean ask her question because she's been waiting for some time.
Wonderful. So Jean, fire away, and then I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, but that's it, because I need to be on another meeting at 1:30. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But don't forget that these general questions can also be asked in the Tuesday office hours, and we've added 2 more because we've extended the deadline to April the 28th at 11:59. You now have 3 weeks from Friday, and we've added 2 extra office hours. But Jean, fire away.
Okay, it's quick. I am category
Sure.
2 for a nonprofit organization. And when I asked you a question before, you mentioned something about this being for only 1 county, but our town is in 2 counties. The county line separates the town. Our school district is in 3 counties of students we serve. So I just am curious, do we need, I mean, I thought the idea of community was the sphere of influence of our community. So can you just clarify that?
Yes. So when we talk about multi-county or regional applications in grant category 3, we're talking about the degree to which we are serving those communities, not just that, well, there's a school over here and the incorporated businesses over here, et cetera, et cetera. It's the degree to which that your project proposing is serving more than 1 county, not implicitly, but explicitly. Those projects, how are they serving more than 1 county? So Jean, if you're thinking of explicitly serving through your projects, through your single project ask, more than 1 county, you need to apply for grant category 3. Now, I want to add a gentle word of caution. Even though the state has been awarded $60 million for the whole of California, for the whole of the upstate region, for 19 counties, we only have 3.38 million. If you were to divide that amount between, which we're not going to do, because we have a sort of algorithm that takes into account many things. But if we were going to divide it straight between 3 counties, between 19 counties, that would give each county less than 200,000 each. We have multiple applications coming in from each county. And if every individual applicant is asking for the top dollar amount, it makes it a little harder to share the love. So I'm sharing that kind of inside information now, and also lending a thought from the trenches, in that we have said in our guidelines that we would like to be able to be flexible. So say we get down to the crunch and we can see that we have multiple applications coming in from a county, and that if only if only 5 of them could just scale down their proposed scope of work sufficiently, we could give each one of those organizations slightly less. So bear that in mind when you're applying. I know that when I'm applying for grants to the state, I always ask for the top dollar. In this case, seeing the number of competitive grant applications coming in, I'm sort of hesitating to suggest that you do that unless you know you have the most amazing project, in which case we want to hear about it.
Guys, we have to go.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I do have to go, but I'm going to ask, yes, I'm afraid we have to end now. So we're going to save the, if you could please save the chat so that we know whose questions haven't been answered. And if you could quickly put in our email address one more time and give it to everyone, please copy our email address and be in touch with us if we haven't asked a question. We'll also try to reach out to those of you who haven't, but please show up on Tuesdays as well, okay? We're here for you. Don't forget to use your county partners as well. Gianna, can you quickly put a link to the county partners spreadsheet so that you can, I can see Patrick, for example, is in Placer County. Jean, if you're also serving Placer, you might want to have a word with Patrick, and you can find his contact information in the link that Gianna's just putting in the chat now. And
That's on the resources
it's also on the
page.
resources page as well. All our county partners are on the resources page. So I'm just waiting for you to do that. And great. Okay. So I'm going to say farewell. What a great group this has been. Thank you so much, Liz and Tamara. You're the best. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
See
you
you on
guys, everybody.
Tuesday with